Hey, hey, housewives. Hey, housewives, welcome back. Here we are, and another beautiful week in God's country. Oh my goodness. Just so excited for this guest that we have. And y'all, you wouldn't believe how God just orchestrates our guest list. It's incredible. So since this is someone that Tracy was connected with, I'm going to let Tracy do the bio. Go for
Yeah.
it. Okay. So today we have Bryce Hamilton, and she is a licensed specialist clinical social worker, also known as a child and family therapist. She's been in practice for over 15 years, seeing children, teens, families, and adults. She has a passion for helping people to make changes. Over the years, she has realized so many people are not able to connect to the resources they need, and she wants to help change that. So she started a podcast called Accidental Experts, equipping you with valuable tips and strategies to navigate family life. Welcome to the podcast, Bryce.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here, ladies.
Yes, we have a variety of topics we could talk about. Considering
Yeah.
I have listened to your podcast many times, and I would say you've pretty much hit almost as many episodes as Tori and I in 3 years, and you've done that in about 8 months.
Yes, we've
Yeah.
been busy.
I would say so. What inspired you to start a podcast on top of everything else? You're a mom of 4,
Yeah.
you've got a thriving practice. Like, why on earth would you add a podcast on top of your to-do list?
I know this is a really great question, right? Sometimes I ask myself this. And actually, I said no first. I
Mhm.
was like, no, this is a terrible idea. But I randomly said to my best friend, like, we just kept coming across issues that like we understood because she's a pediatrician and I'm a therapist. And we just kept saying, like, I wish parents understood this, or I wish teens understood this, or I wish kids understood this, or I wish teachers understood this, right? Like that there's so much information that we have that families don't always have access to. And
Right.
so I was joking and I said, we should start a podcast. And she was like, yes, you should. And I was like, oh no. No, no, no. I was expecting you to say no, but you said yes. And so then I just couldn't get it off my mind. Like it kept coming back to me over and over. And so I was like, this is something that God wants me to do.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna do it. And so that's how I'm here.
That story sounds oddly familiar.
Yes,
We know what that is like as well. Hold on one second. Real life, you guys. This is dogs in the background. So just ignore. Again, our studio is my house. So if you hear dogs barking, don't worry about it. And,
Well,
we're
I
all
love
the
doing
same.
real life, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is none of us are doing this perfectly. It's all just we're trying it out, right? Every moment for the first time.
Yep. Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
for our listeners, just so that I can direct them to your podcast, I'm just going to talk about a couple episode ideas and then we're going to jump into like what our topic is going to be about. Obviously, being a child and family therapist, you have a lot of things on your podcast about anxious children, ADHD kids, autism, eating disorders, teens, lots of teen episodes around like vaping and social media, grief, losing a pet, neurodiversity. I could just keep going, but those are just some basic ones. And friends, listen, like go find her podcast and use it as a library to help get just additional knowledge on any of those categories. But she has just other doctors and psychologists and the police, department. Like you have so many resources, and I love that being on a podcast platform, it's free to everybody to go get some help if they're seeking some.
Yeah.
I yeah, and I was gonna just say, like, it's a topical, like, "Uh-oh, the dog just died. How do I handle this with my kiddos?"
Yeah.
Like, there's so much information, and that's why, I mean, we're podcast junkies and,
Yeah.
and because there's so much out there that people are willing to share and spend time on for free. Like, you don't have to know it all or I mean, it's amazing. So, okay, so let's kind of dive in. We want to talk with you about anxious kiddos. And I always like to share just personal stories and we share on the podcast a lot what's going on in our real life as we talk about real life.
Yes.
And over the last few years, I have learned so much about anxiety as my daughter has been through that. One of the things when we started this journey and trying to seek help for our daughter, we didn't know what we were looking for. And so I would love for you to answer the question for others that are listening too. When your child is dealing with something difficult and you don't know how to identify it, what does that look like? And how would they identify where they go to get help?
Yeah. I think that's it. There's not a one size fits all kind of answer to this question. I think, when we're looking at anxiety just in general, it is such a vast challenge, right? Like we have OCD, we have generalized anxiety, we have social anxiety, we have specific phobias, right? Like we have a lot of different topics that all fall under anxiety, right? And we can have other things that happen like PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, that have happened that then create anxiety, right? So I think the thing, if we're looking just generally at anxiety, I think what you're looking for, what I see a lot is either fear. We're refusing to do something that, like, based on our age, about our developmental stage, we're capable of doing something, right? And we don't want to, or we're refusing to do that. A lot of times I see that it presents as anger. And so kids are upset, frustrated. They're saying maybe unkind things to their parents. They're refusing to do things that maybe they do want to do. Like, there's something fun like a school musical, right? And then they've been practicing and practicing and doing all this stuff. And then the day comes and they're like, nope, not going to do it. Right. And a lot of tears sometimes. It's, clinging on to parents. It's using the parent, primarily the mom, but it can also be the dad, as their like support person. Right. And I think we all have anxiety. That's the truth. Anxiety
Yeah.
is great. It is a
Mhm.
guardrail to danger, right? It kind of keeps us in balance. The problem is that with anxiety, when it is clinical anxiety, it means it's disrupting our daily life. It
Yeah.
means it's imposing itself on what we're doing and keeping us, it's limiting us from being able to do what we actually want to do. Does that help you understand kind of like what we're looking for in terms of
Oh, yeah.
symptomology?
Yeah, and I would say too, and if you could lean into, and this is just because we obviously a lot of our audience, I know the ages of their kids are pretty much late elementary and into the teenage years. What does it look like? How does it come out for a teenager?
Yeah, so I think for teenagers, still anger, right?
Mhm.
Still refusal. Sometimes it's saying they've done something they haven't, right? Sometimes lying comes into play because they know that there is an expectation for them to have certain behavior and they're not able to do that because their anxiety is limiting them. They may not go out for the soccer team because they're too afraid to not make the team. Sometimes it's being perfectionistic. I mean, I see that in elementary school kids too, that it's like, I'm not gonna start something if I can't do it perfectly. So it's sometimes procrastination, right? Like there's just so many things. It can be headaches. We can look at the somatic part, right? Stomach aches, feeling nauseated, right? Being worried about throwing up. It can be, I mean, I think feeling dizzy or weak, right? The list goes on and on. They can be sweaty. They can, right? Like these symptoms are happening. And really what anxiety looks like when we look at it in terms of the brain, we have this part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is basically our body's alarm system. Our brain knows that it needs to be protected. And so it is like literally in the middle of our brain. So it's protecting itself because it's the alarm system. So what happens is the amygdala gets triggered when there is danger or when we think there could be danger, which is where the anxiety that is out of place, maybe that's causing problems, gets turned on. So it basically gives our brain false alarms. And so it says something is dangerous when really it's not. And so it is really hard when your brain is giving you the exact same chemical response to a tiger dropping down in your living room as going to school or playing with a new friend or taking a test. It is really hard for us to say this is not a big deal because our body is telling us this is a big deal. So then we respond to that. And then as parents, sometimes we're like, come on, this isn't such a big deal. Move on. Like, come on, you can do this. Right. And it's not that that's bad, but it's also like we have to recognize that emotion. Like, wow, this is really scary for you, or this is really hard because it is. Right. And then we can encourage our kids to go forward. But I think, when we look at this alarm system, anytime we're getting out of our comfort zone, right, where we want to be, our brain lines that with fear because it wants us to do all the same things because then it knows how things can be predictable. And so it provides kind of safety, but we all know that we can't stay in the same space as being a 5-year-old as being a 25-year-old. We have to grow. Like that is part of our obligation in life is to challenge ourselves. And so we're always going to meet fear when we get to the edge of our comfort zone every time, right? And our brain is going to say death, fire, the worst things are on the other side of this. But then once we do it, what we find is that maybe fiery outline on our comfort zone is actually those like pretend flames, right? They're kind of like the fireplace you have that you just like turn on and turn off, but it's not actually heat, right? Like it's not real
Yeah.
fire, it's just that. And so we get through and we're like, oh, actually, that wasn't so bad. Like I can totally do that. And that's where growth is and freedom.
Mhm.
But if we don't, then and we keep keeping ourselves in our comfort zone, whatever that is for your particular kid, then we're not going to grow. We're not going to push that boundary. And I think in our society, we oftentimes, good parents want to protect their kids.
Mhm.
We want to keep them safe. We do not want them to be uncomfortable. We want to step in to make things easier for them because it's also uncomfortable for us. Let's be honest, right? When our kids are uncomfortable, we're uncomfortable.
Mhm. Very much so. Well, and can we talk about how we were all raised as kids, rub a little dirt on it, it's okay,
Mhm.
suck it up. Like so and I can't say that I particularly was, like I definitely was able to share my emotion, highs, lows, crying, anger, like I had space for that and conversation around that growing up. However, as a society, as you were just discussing, I think that's where we're at right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, and obviously talk to it from your experience and knowledge, is what we have experienced in the last few years with COVID and with, different school things and just what's been, aspiring in our world, that kids are just so much overwhelmed, and it's social media and it's the phones in their hands. It's so much, right? But as parents, we, one, never learned as well. And
Mhm.
two, now we have all of the same things on our own, on ourselves, and we don't know how to communicate. So we can't teach our kids how to communicate or understand what they're saying. I mean, I just love that you just described the amygdala. I've done all that research. I know all that
Yeah.
as well. Like we've named her amygdala and all those things. However, like people don't realize that, like, yes, that anxiety that that child is feeling is the same as you, like you said, seeing a tiger or burning, getting burnt, putting your hand on the stove or something. It is the same response. And we don't know how to communicate about it.
Mhm.
Well, my question is like I mean, we're big proponents of yes, find yourself a therapist, someone to talk to that can help you through things. So we love and are big encouragers of that because we do it. And like for parents, at what point do you say, okay, my kid's anxious for, each time they take a test? At what point does it become a we need to talk through with somebody because I don't like at some like we are our kids are capable of, because we did survive
Yeah.
despite how we were, like no, our I mean, rub some dirt on it. We're still here 30 years later. So it did to a certain extent work, but it's like at what point do you seek professional help when your kid is experiencing or like what are some signs that you would say this is when you need to go and find some help?
Yeah. So I think, the thing about therapy is there's like not a steadfast rule of like, I've never read someplace like, if this is happening, then do therapy. But what I would say in my experience is intervention sooner rather than later is always better, right? So it is way better for me to help support a family that has an anxious elementary school kid than an anxious middle schooler when we have been rehearsing anxiety for years and years and years. Now, if anxiety just pops up in middle school, great, right? Like that's the time to address it. Or high school, like it's something that like has gotten to a place where it's causing enough disruption that I love seeing kids who want to be here, right? Teens who want to be here. And a lot of times they're like, whatever, right? Especially the teens. But then when we start talking, I'm like, look, here's the deal. If you don't like this, if I'm not your person, that's totally fine. I don't have to be your person. I will help you find your person. But I think it's also about that connection piece. So going back to like, what are we looking for? I think it's if we are continually meeting an issue with some type of consistency, right? So like test anxiety, I think, yeah, we could get some tools for that. But I would guess that that kid is not just anxious for tests, right? Like they
Mhm.
also are perfectionistic. So that's presenting at other times, right? They're also struggling with maybe relationships because they want friends to be a certain way or follow the rules, or there's some rigidity to their behavior. So it's like, I think when you notice that it as you as the parent are getting frustrated with your kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we're not able to navigate through that. Like you feel like you don't have the skills, right?
Mhm.
Or you feel like your kids don't have the skills, and you can talk to them like, hey, there are people out there who are therapists and this is what they do. They help you get skills so that you can manage this feeling that you're having,
Mhm. No,
right?
I
And if
love
they say yes, go, please.
Yeah. I love that example of saying that it's the consistency. It's just being situationally aware of what your children are going through, like connecting the dots. Like this is
Mhm,
more than one area of life. This isn't just,
mhm.
tests. This is, anytime that they're put on the spot or something like that. Like I love that explanation. I wanted to ask too, and this is just kind of an outside question to the whole topic. How would you encourage moms? And the reason I obviously can speak to this in my experience, I remember like, I remember what did I do? Like, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? Like, did I not say goodbye enough in separation? Was the whole like walk away at preschool method the right one to do? Like, I just remember questioning myself over and over and over until I realized it wasn't my fault. We are dealing with a root issue that she has had. It's going to be a part of her. And now we just have tools to learn to move forward. So, what would your advice be to mamas who are listening to this and daddies and grandparents, but advice to them who are stuck in that, like, hey, what did I do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, look, I have 4 kids and all of my kids have anxiety at different times, right?
Mhm.
So I am trained in this, have been practicing for a long time. But we also have a family history of anxiety. So I think, there is a genetic component to this, a propensity that we will likely be anxious if we have a family history of that,
Yeah.
right? And even if it's not diagnosed anxiety, but if it's like, okay, things for you are hard sometimes, or for your spouse are hard, or for your parents when you were little, your spouse's parents, or whoever it is, right? Like in your family, you have anxious people, right? That's nothing you can control.
Yeah.
Genetics are nothing that we have control over, right? Like we're not picking our partners based on what their genetic profile is, right? Like we're looking for a lot bigger picture than that.
My next husband, I am. I am gonna pick. I'm gonna ask for a blood
Yeah.
test, genetic markers. As Andrew
I
did this.
also I'd also like to see a bank statement and credit score next
Yeah.
time. I'm gonna
The
so
things we learn, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I
Well,
think, those parts are not something we can control. But I think here's the deal. You're doing the best you can. Right? I
mhm,
think in those moments, truly, you've never done this job before with that kid at that time. What works for one kid may not work for the other kids. And that is no fault of your own. Sure, we can do things that suck sometimes.
mhm.
We might yell, we might get upset, we might be frustrated, we might encourage our kids to do something before they're ready maybe. And that, I mean, we're doing the best we can. Really, I've never met a parent who's like, "You know what? I really wanna suck at this job. I really want to, like, really ruin this, kid I created, and I just want them to have a miserable life." I've never met a parent like that.
Yeah.
So
Hey, Andrew and I, we talk about like with saving money for the kids, and we always say, we're saving money for college, which now is I'm like, you don't need college. And then two, one wedding, we'll pay for one wedding because we have two girls, and then as much therapy as you can afford, because we know going in with us as parents, oh, you're gonna need therapy. Like, we're setting the bar real low. Like, we've
Well,
seen
and I
it.
think the reality is we all need support, right? So I think, it is unreasonable. Moms do a really great job of guilting themselves. Fantastic. We are the
Yeah.
worst and best at that, right?
Mhm.
Like I even find myself victim to that sometimes. My daughter gave me this note one day on the way to school. She's 8 and she was like, "Don't open it until you get to work." And I was like, "Okay." I thought it was going to be like this sweet
Like,
little
oh,
note, and it was like I open it in the car and it says, "Mommy, I love you so much. I wish I got to see you more." And I was like, tears,
oh,
right? And I was like, "Oh my
oh,
gosh." And then I was like talking to my husband. I was like, "I should quit my job. I like, what am I doing here?" Right? And he was like, "Hold on. You work like 3 11-hour days, and then you're home like most Mondays, most Fridays, and the weekend. Like, that's more than I see them. And that's more than like a 40-hour work week parent sees them. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
okay, like my kids just have a skewed perspective on what reality is with that.
Mhm.
But I'm also like, okay, so I'm gonna be more attentive to those
Right.
times, right? Like
Right.
I'm gonna set dates again, right? Like we do mother-daughter dates or mother-son dates and then father-son and father-daughter dates. And those things had just skipped the calendar, right? So then I'm like, okay, back to that part. But I think we can't own it all, right? Like I think also what we're doing probably not as well as a society right now is that we really look at one family raising those kids. That's not how this was meant to be. We're supposed to do this in a community, right? We are not
Yeah.
supposed to do it in isolation. And so I think oftentimes it is so much pressure on one parent or two parents to do all of these things. Like we can't possibly drive them to all the sports and work and pack all the lunches and
Mhm.
volunteer at all of the activities at school and right and
Yeah.
all of those things. You can't. And so I think, then we start getting anxious too. And I think the part that maybe we can take responsibility for as parents is how we're showing up for our kids, right?
Mhm.
Are we our best self? I would rather parents take responsibility for that piece than owning their kids' anxiety because that is not something that you can really control. That's about that kid learning skills and you learning skills to help support them, but it's like your anxiety coming in is probably something that is contributing to their anxiety, but if you're taking care of yourself, that will help your kid to be able to take care of themselves or for you to support your kid.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, because kids know. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
they can feel, we pretend that they don't know what the feeling is, how the
Mhm.
tension is in the house or how you're doing, but they very much
And
know.
something that I learned that I can encourage other mothers who have a child with anxiety or just a child that is challenging at some point, right? It doesn't have to be anxiety. One thing that I learned is it's so like we think that we should just like, I don't know what it is, keep it to ourselves if we have something going on. No, like your kids can tell, and it's okay to say, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. I don't
Mhm,
want you to take this on as there's anything with you or that I've done something, or that you've done something. I just need my space to go take care of like what I'm dealing with." Like,
mhm.
okay, because you teach them to go ahead and take that space when they need it too. I
Yeah.
mean, let's just talk about, I mean, we don't need to talk about it because that's a whole nother podcast about hormones.
Mhm.
But when you are having like low day or a high day of anxiety or low, I
Oh,
mean,
dude,
hormones play.
I need to introduce that system to my girls because we're a house. Andrew's in a house full of
Well,
girls.
yes, and it is. It's something that does play a part in how you're responding, and I have a child who tends to think that it's because of them, and so I have to
Mhm.
constantly remind, "Nope, mom's on her cycle," or whatever, like, I'm having a time.
Well, and I'll say to this, like what something that I started couple of years ago, but early on, I would take on Andrew's feelings, his emotions, like for happiness. And I'm sure, same thing with kids, right? And we, if they're not happy, I take it personally, like you're not happy with me. And so it's a matter like I would just ask the question, okay, is this is this a work thing? Or is this an us thing? Or is this a something else thing? And then that way I can figure out what box that goes into. And then if it's an us thing, I can go, okay, we talk about it now or you want to do it later? Or if it's a work thing, and then I go, cool. Like if you want help, but I know that that's not because of me or involves me. And I mean, and that's good with our kids too. I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
I think my favorite advice that you gave
Uh-oh.
was talking about bringing the kids home from school.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. We joke. Well, not we joke. My husband is amazing. He makes special effort to, when he can, to take the girls for that extra time to
Mhm.
take the girls and to pick them up from school if he's possible. And, and so it's a 5-minute drive from school though. And he's so excited when he gets to pick them up. And then by the time he gets home, he's like, and you can't see, if you're not seeing my face, you can't see the Andrew face
Yeah.
that he makes, but it's like he's so frustrated. And then you texted me and you tell me what your response was.
Well, you better show up with a snack. Like, just
See,
snack them, feed them.
Yeah.
Before anything, there's no decisions that need to be made in the first 15 minutes
They
after school.
yes,
No
you
decision
you
should be
said
made. And that's what it was about, was a decision he was trying to get him to make. And it's like, no, just feed him.
yeah, snack no, you said snack, decompress, and sometimes your kid just needs to take a poop.
Oh, I did say that.
Like, because they've been holding it in for the whole like, but it's I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." Like
Yes.
that and something just as simple as the 5-minute drive home from picking them up from school can change the rest of your day dramatically
Yes.
because of that. Like, they're
Yes.
little people too.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Well, I have
Snacks are
one.
so important. I definitely support that piece of that,
snack.
feeding them. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. It
Protein especially, like, that's my favorite.
Yes, and that's one of the things too that like that the kid even if they are grumpy, it's possibly food, but they just want the junk because of that you know happiness of like, oh, it's just candy. No, like get them a hard-boiled egg or a beef stick or
Yeah.
something else before, and then they'll calm down a lot easier.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I want to talk about, to help our viewers or our listeners to understand what therapy can look like, because there are a lot of different types of therapies, and it's not always just, obviously you do have to meet and sit and talk. There is a lot of talking that has to happen in order to get to the bottom of it. But we started because our child was young with play therapy, which was amazing because she actually enjoyed going, but it worked too. So can you
Mhm.
talk about some of the variety of therapies that are out there?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I am a trained play therapist. And so in play therapy, we believe that kids play their feelings better than they talk about them. So sometimes it's hard and for them to give the words and so they can show us better than they can talk about them. And so we use different toys. If you can see my office, I have like a toy kitchen and I have all kinds of babies and we have different fidgets and different games and books and all these different things to help kids to learn about how to talk about their feelings, but we don't expect that they come in capable of doing that. Now, if a kid is capable of doing that, great. But I still find that my teens do way better with playing a game around something where I have constructed that red and green and blue and yellow and whatever the colors are, or whatever the activity is, means a certain thing to answer a certain question. It kind of breaks the barrier, right? And so we can do directive play therapy, which is where the therapist is directing what you're doing, or a non-directive play therapy, which is where the kid is showing you what they need. And I think probably a hybrid of that and based on what age they are is the best modality when you're using therapy for that. We also have cognitive behavioral therapy, so you might hear that as CBT. And the idea of that is we have thoughts, and our thoughts determine our feelings, and our feelings determine our actions. And so, what we're trying to do is to intervene with that. We can't stop the thought, but we can change what we do after that, right? So, we're trying to disrupt that process that's happening to intermix a new skill tool. So, that is more of a tangible thing that you take away versus just maybe play therapy might be, I mean, we do tools in play therapy, but I think everybody kind of does a hybrid. Maybe there's some real people out there who really do like true play therapy where, you're not really giving tools, all the work's done in the playroom. But in my office, I mix a lot of things together because I found that like certain things work. And then we have exposure, right? So if we have a phobia of something or a fear of something, we're going to expose you to the stimulus. We know that exposing to the thing that is causing the problem actually breaks down the anxiety. But it's not just a matter of like throwing your kid out there. If they're afraid of sharks, like throwing them in the middle of the ocean is not the best strategy, right? So we break that down to be in manageable chunks so that we can prove to our brain that we're safe because we want to get close to the amygdala turning on without getting the amygdala turned on, basically. And so we're kind of coaching down the path so that this kid can tolerate this. Or if it does get turned on, it's like moderately, right? Instead of it being like full throttle, right? We also have this new training that's out, and I just did my training in this over the summer, and it's called space training. And no, I'm not an astronaut. My husband keeps teasing that he is. I'm like,
Be part of Space Force.
yes, I know, right? But it's space training stands for supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. And this is about both kind of a CBT model, but mostly about exposure and teaching parents how to talk to their kids about these anxious emotions because we have a tendency to want to accommodate our kids' anxiety. And so when we accommodate it, we actually steal from our kids the opportunity to learn that they can do hard things. And so I love this model because I think our society is very phobic of hard.
Mhm.
We're
We
enablers.
Yeah.
Parents have become enablers. We
Yes,
live in Johnson County,
yes.
a county full of enablers, you know? Like
Yeah. I mean, and it's good parents want to support their kids, right? So it's not about being a bad parent. It's just about
they have good intentions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
so I think it's hard for us to see our kids uncomfortable, which
Mhm.
is fair. But that is we're not going to be here forever, right? And part of our job is to coach our kids how to handle hard things. So that's what we're looking at in terms of those things. Then we also have EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Lots of words to say. We may have something that's happened to us that has created a narrative in our brain, a negative narrative, a negative belief about ourselves. And so it is keeping us like bad things are going to happen because maybe something bad did happen. And now our brain thinks that whenever this feeling happens, something bad's going to happen. And so we use that cognition to remove basically the emotional reaction to that. We don't change how your brain functions in terms of what it remembers. It's not changing memories, it's just reducing the emotional response to that. And then we're able to install a positive cognition. So then our brain is seeking to affirm this positive belief instead of seeking to affirm a negative belief. So that's like the most simplistic way that I can explain that. But those are generally the ways that we are supporting anxiety. There's certainly other modalities, but those are probably the top ones that therapists are using.
Well, I think I'm familiar with a couple of them, and we actually just had a another therapist who was specific in regards to narcissism. She helps people heal from that. She was on a few episodes ago, and she was also speaking to the EMDR and being that very similar to what you said, but like someone has experienced something traumatic, and it
Mhm.
can be like a sound. Like she was referencing like jiggling of coins in like your hand or your pocket. That was something that she had to do herself to work through because there was an incident with just that. And I think it's just so fascinating that, our bodies, we need to listen to our bodies. And I think that's what I'm like getting at with whatever it is that we're talking about, specifically, obviously, anxious kids, but helping them see like, okay, we're either if something happens, they're going into fight or flight, like we're either going to get angry, respond, get crazy, or sometimes, hide, yeah, and
Mhm.
not handle it. And so encouraging people to talk about it
Mhm.
with their kids and to address the things that might be a trigger or what offset or sets them off, those kinds of things. That's like absolutely why we just keep bringing these topics up because one, we go through them. So personal experiences are the best teacher,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
Well, and we like we said we do the guests that we always bring on, we're selfish because it's
That's
people
what we
we
want,
want.
we need.
Yeah, it's like our good 1 hour of like, okay, we have all the questions. Can you answer these? Where we need to go back into. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one note I wanted to say on therapy, because like it's overwhelming to imagine, like, as a parent, you would know what type of therapy your kid needs. You don't need to know what type of
Yeah.
therapy your kid needs.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that not all therapists are created equally. I think, in fairness, right? There's some really fantastic therapists out there, and there are some that kind of are not so fantastic. But what I do know, and this is something that stuck with me even from school, um, we read a study that said 70% of successful outcome is rapport. So meaning do you and your child connect to that therapist? So to me, that is so critical, right? So if you have a relationship with somebody, you are going to be so much more willing to do the work, even if they don't have 1,000 certifications.
Right.
And something they have the desire to help you, they have the time for your kid, and you like them and your kid likes them.
Mhm. Those are key. Yep,
So key,
absolutely.
right? And if you feel like it's not a good fit, look at another therapist, right? Like finding a therapist is kind of like dating. If this is not the right person, you can let them go, right?
Yeah.
And find somebody else. And I think parents oftentimes feel like committed, but and therapy is also not a fast process. Like that's the
Mhm.
part that sucks about my job is I want to get to the end, right? Like I want to like quickly move you from here to where we need to go, where the goals are that we've set. I cannot do that because we did not gain this overnight. We're not going
Mhm.
to repair or rebuild or support this overnight, but it's a method of we are making progress. You are seeing your kid make improvements. That's what we're looking for. And as a therapist, if I have a kid where I'm like, we're just not making progress. I'm gonna meet with the parents. I'm gonna call it out, right? And if your therapist is not doing that, look for a new one. Because if you just are like if you don't know what's going on, like I don't generally have parents in the room when I'm doing therapy because
Mhm.
especially with anxious kids, I want to teach them how to cope without their parent because you're not going to be there always as a parent. You don't go to school with them. You're not like maybe in the game, you're not their coach for sports or whatever. So they have to be able to go out into the world. And so then they're learning to rely on themselves to
Yeah.
build that comfort and confidence in
Independence.
themselves.
That's
But
good.
then the parents should be included, right? To say, hey, this is a tool that we're working on. We're going to explain it to you, right? And then I want you to practice this at home. Not that everybody has to follow my modality or how I do things, but I think there is an important part of being part of therapy with your kid. And sometimes you need to go in and meet with a therapist, download your stuff to say, like, is this contributing to how I'm handling this?
Mhm.
Or like, I can't do that thing. And like, maybe that's limiting me. That's good because then the therapist can understand the dynamics. And if you're not able to be honest, like, yeah, I am yelling all the time, or yeah, I do still use spankings, or whatever it is, we know that those things are not very productive behavior changes, right? Those are not creating a safe, healthy environment for you and your kid. And so, yes, we do, I still yell sometimes. I really try not to. Like, I think I could count on one hand how many times I've really yelled, but that's because I have put so much effort into not doing that.
Mhm.
And it's a constant effort of like, I take a break. I'm like, mommy is a break. I'm getting upset. Like, I'm walking away. Right. Like, I will
Yeah.
be back. And I like sit in
Mhm.
my room and I cry if I need to. I like self talk. Like, what would I tell my patients to do? And then I go back and I engage that. But we can do better. And so, the therapist should also be encouraging you to learn skills as a parent. And if it's something bigger than just a parenting thing, it's a childhood thing or something, an experience you've had, then having your own therapist.
Yeah.
So I think everybody can benefit from the support and looking at therapy as part of this community that's helping to raise your kids. I
Well,
think
I
that's
Like
think
that. Yeah.
well, I was gonna say, I mean, it's too often parents have gotten complacent with the idea of I'm dropping my kids off to school and letting the teachers teach them,
Mhm.
or Christian schools. Like it's the Christian school's job to instill the biblical values. No, it's not.
Mhm.
You're still the parent. You're still the guardian. You're still that's why they're under your care until, they're not qualified as an adult until 18. You do have to be engaged
Yeah.
in the raising of them and the growth of them. Like that's we're called to do that as Christians, as parents, and too often a lot of parents just, pass it on. Well, like they're not with me for 8 hours a day. They go to school. Like, well, great, but you still have to call it out when you see it or be part of it
Mhm.
and reinforce it at home. Cause you can have a kid that's not a butthead at school, but then at home, you're like, they're a butthead and you're like, and just let them run wild. That you're not doing them any favors.
Yeah.
You're
Mhm.
not doing them any
Yeah.
favors.
Well, and that brought up something for me thinking about like oftentimes parents will say like they can't talk about their feelings. Like one of the questions I talk about lots in intakes are like, how well does your child express their feelings? And sometimes parents will say, well, but not very often. And then the second question I'll ask is, how well do you talk about your feelings? And they're like, not so well, I guess. Right. And so it's also that we are a model for our kids. Right. So if we want our kids to be able to do something, we have to show them that we're doing it. Right. So I joke that my kids probably think like as they get bigger, they're going to be like, you were so weird. But I'm like, at the store, I'm like, oh, what a bummer. I'm like so frustrated. They don't have any good looking broccoli today. Right. Like I am talking about all of the emotions I am having are like, how was my work day? It was frustrating, or it was really exciting, or I had a really positive day, or like I had a sad moment today. I am talking about that like within reason of like, I'm not having my kids take on my emotions, but I
Mhm.
am talking about them. And then I'm teaching them how to navigate through that. Or like if my husband and I, like he says this and I say that, and then there's like a look that we give each other, like, you know, we're in a little silent
Yes.
argument, right?
Yes.
You know what that's
The
like.
spouse
And then
look.
yeah, yes, the
Yeah.
spouse look. And
Mhm.
and then, my kids are like, "Ooh." And I'm like, "Hey." we're going to figure this out, right? Like, we're going to talk through this and we'll come back to you with what the decision is because, daddy said this and mommy said this. And I didn't know that daddy had said this. And, so we're going to figure it out. And so, like, we're teaching them how to problem solve, how to address conflict. Like, we have to model these things. They don't just like know how to do them.
Mm-hmm.
That's
That's
very
true.
true. And that's something that's important to me for my girls is that I mean, obviously we want to model what a good marriage is because that's what, you bring those expectations into your own marriage. I know that Andrew and I both did. But two, it's just like you want them to see the frustration. Like we're too often showing our kids just the highlight reel of our
Mhm.
life,
Mhm.
and not saying, dang it, it's frustrating. I'm going to have to go to another grocery store to get good broccoli. Like
Yes.
words that never come out of my mouth, by the way. That ever my children will never have to worry about that. But it's something that we just normally internalize, and don't think anything of, but just making that like, this is going to be inconvenient or,
Yes.
Yeah.
like,
And
but
it is something too, though, that until it is like brought to your awareness that you don't do it, you don't know that you're not doing it. So I think that's the key that like, having gone through therapy myself and in our marriage therapy and, also working with tools with my daughter too, that like the awareness that has come uh, is is good. And I want to encourage people, in that way that it's not a negative thing that you
Mhm.
don't know or that you're acting one way or not the other or not sharing your emotions more. It's just it's knowledge is power, like the more you know and the more that you are educating yourself to again, if you're here and you're listening, it's because you want to help your child in your family or someone in your family or someone that it is
or
helpful.
you're listening because you want to drown out your kids for 45 minutes and just have your and that too. Nope, that's totally fine. That's justified.
It is, especially if you just like listening to Unlikely Housewives, right?
Yes. We'll support that all day long, guys. I do want to just highlight one other thing too is when you're talking about the different therapies and the different ways that anxiety shows itself, it's not just emotional. Sometimes it's physical too, like the dizziness, the headaches, the nausea. Anyway, whatever. But our bodies, we are so trained to just take a quick pill and like, I just have a headache, so I'm gonna just take some Advil. I just, like we have got to listen to our bodies more intentionally, and that's hard. It's so hard to listen, and that's a journey that you and I have been on
Mhm.
personally as we grow wiser
Get
and
older and have
no, wiser, just
Oh,
wiser.
wiser,
We don't
sorry.
get older, we get wiser. But it's something that we live in such a fast-paced life that we don't take the time to go, hold on, relax my shoulders. I can feel myself getting into, like it's just a matter of that. And that in itself is just that skill, teaching our kids to be fully aware of their body and going, wait, like recognizing the fight or flight mode that they're in and just saying, hold on, am I really in danger here? The
Mhm.
answer is no, or yes, I am. There is a tiger in the room.
Mhm.
But I mean, that the therapy you're talking about helps these kids, these families be more aware of the body that God created because he did. I mean, our body is so cool. Our
Our bodies are
are
so
so
cool.
cool. God is so cool. I mean, he didn't have to give us all this stuff, all the bells and whistles. I'll say that. Bells and whistles on our body and the ability to like critical thinking and, healing
Self.
ourselves essentially
Yeah.
through help and community, and I mean, that in itself is incredible and wonderful skill that you are giving our parents and kids
Yeah.
in this new generation.
Mhm. Okay, so before we wrap up, how can people learn more about you and find you and your podcast?
Yeah. So podcast is available on Apple, any Spotify, any podcast location for Excellent Experts with Bryce Hamilton. And if you're looking for therapy, so I'll be honest and say I am so full, but I have really fantastic therapists also in my office, right? So people can just Google me, Bryce Hamilton, and you'll find our office. We're located in Leeway, but we have a website which is helping people in kansascity.com, and all the therapists are listed on that. And yeah, so there's that way, or there's, a Psychology Today, or different mediums that we all have our information on good therapy, and people can find us like that.
And we'll include all those in the
Yeah.
show notes for you guys, for you unlikely housewives listening to this, to make it easy to find. And I wanted to say thank you so much, Bryce. It's been a pleasure to put a name or a face to a name, knowing your close connection with Tracy. And just, it's been very eye opening to talk to you. And thank you just for your wisdom and your time, because your time is very valuable. And
Thank
as we
you.
were talking, so thank you very much for
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
being
you,
gracious with it.
Bryce.
It's been such
All
a
right.
pleasure. Thanks, ladies.
Yes.
Thank-
All right, housewives, until next week.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.